A Lion locomotive in 5-inch gauge. This is part 2, repairing the paint on the tender and cleaning the wheels. As I carried the tender from the house to the workshop, it was raining, so it looks a lot worse than it is. Straight to work, the paintwork is chipped in places and this needs repairing to make the tender look good. The paint on any part of a steam locomotive or tender that is made from brass is going to be prone to chipping, because brass doesn't take paint very well. Unless, of course, you use 2-pack paint, but this is not very suitable for spraying in and around the home workshop. Whenever I look at tenders, I always see paint chipping around the top edge. I don't mean on a glass case locomotive, they're generally well protected. Out in the wild, in such places as a Model Locomotive Society track, the top of the tender is particularly vulnerable. It's quite difficult firing a model locomotive when it's running down the track. It's wobbling all over the place and you're trying to shovel some coal into a very small fire hole door. And on its way from the tender to the fire hole door, the shovel usually catches the rim of the tender. I speak from experience because I've done this many times. I'm removing the paint from around the rim. First of all, I tried wet to dry sandpaper, but then I found that an RDG Tools 7-inch rule was the ideal tool for the job. A quick tip, take your time with this because you don't want to mark any more of the paint. It's a good idea when all the paint is gone from round the edge to remove the loose particles using a compressed air line as shown here. Leaping into the picture now is a tin of Brasso wadding. This is great stuff to use in the workshop, especially for polishing brass. I soon developed an effective system for doing this job. In my right hand I have a piece of wet to dry sandpaper, and then I change it for a piece of Brasso wadding, which I use to polish up the half-round beading around the edge of the tender. After the Brasso, I just use a cloth to shine everything up. Time now to repair the paint and clean the wheels. This is a tin of some stuff called panel wipe. It's naphtha, very much like lighter fluid that I used to put in my Zippo lighter. You need to read the instructions on these tins of solvents because some of them can be dangerous. I've poured some of the naphtha into the cap from an aerosol can, and now using a soft paintbrush I'm brushing the naphtha all over the tender, one side at a time. This solvent does not attack the paint unless the paint is very soft or still wet. What it is good at is degreasing and removing small particles. After the first application of the naphtha, I removed it before it all evaporated using a cloth. Naphtha evaporates very quickly. Here's the first piece of damaged paint I want to have a look at. And apart from the chips around the top which have been removed, this is the worst bit. What I'm currently doing is using the tip of a piece of wet to dry sandpaper to score the surface of the brass on the damaged part. And after doing this, I feathered the edges slightly with the same piece of wet to dry sandpaper, followed by another application of naphtha to get rid of the particles. The quantity of panel wipe in my aerosol can cap is now contaminated with particles of old paint, but I don't want to waste it, so I think I'm going to use it for cleaning the wheels. Wet to dry sandpaper is my favourite method of cleaning cast iron wheel rims. And the wet part of wet or dry doesn't just mean water. Water's very good, but not on cast iron because it will rust. Yes, you've guessed it, I'm going to use the naphtha in my aerosol spray can cap. And if you watch these clips carefully, you can see the naphtha chasing away all the dirt and grease from the wheels. The wheels are in good condition, no chips or scrapes, and not much rust either. Soon the wheels were very clean. Moving back to the paint repairs, this is a can of self-etch primer. I use this a lot, and it's very good stuff. I've sprayed a very small amount of this into an aerosol can cap, because I have a lot of these. When brush painting paint that is in aerosol cans, it's a little bit thin as it's sprayed out of the can. So you need to leave it for a while to allow the solvent to evaporate, so the paint gets a little thicker. Using a very small paintbrush, I've applied some of this etching primer to the bare brass showing through the damaged paint. However, I do not recommend doing this. I've done it so you won't have to. After a while, this etching primer, or the solvent in the etching primer, starts to attack the original paint, usually on the edges of the original paint, You can see it clearly here if you compare the previous image with this one. In the end, I wiped off the etching primer before it had a chance to really bubble the paint around the edge. Now it's time to mix the paint. Lee Griffiths, the man who I bought this engine from, said as far as he was aware, the tender and parts of the engine had been painted using Halford's Smooth Right paint. But I haven't got any of that at the moment, so I'm going to try and match the paint colour using a tin of Humbrol gloss enamel and add some Humbrol satin black paint to it. I didn't get it right immediately, this was too bright. Adding some more Humbrol satin black to the mix made it a lot better. There was a bad chip on the handrail, so I sanded this down, but I painted the entire handrail to make it match. Matching paint colours is very difficult. When you first apply the paint, it's always too wet and too shiny, but once it starts to dry, it darkens. So what I'm doing is touching in various parts of the paintwork, then I will let the paint dry and have a look at it and see how close it is. The main thing is to get some paint onto the damaged area. And if it's not 100% the correct colour, once it's thoroughly dry, you can rub it down with some very fine wet-to-dry sandpaper and try again. A quick, obvious word of caution. You must not use cellulose paint for this. I'm using Humbrol synthetic enamel, because this does not dissolve the paint underneath. You've seen me many times using cellulose thinners to remove paint, but now removing the old paint really is the last thing I want to do. In this clip I'm painting the coal bunker part of the tender because it was a little bit too green. I'm painting it using HMG Paint's Satin Black, which is almost matte black and really good paint. It doesn't look too good when it's wet, but once it's dried it will look really good, and for all you paintophiles out there, here's a picture of the paint drying. That is it for this episode. I'd just like to say, as usual, stay safe, stay well, thanks for watching, and I hope you found it useful. Please take the time to visit my Mainsteam Models website and click on the section of the website that says Video Playlists. And by doing that, you can find other videos that you may like to watch. And by using the playlists, you can actually watch the videos back to back.